The lights dim. A soft hush falls over the crowd. A barefoot young man in a worn-out white shirt steps onto the America's Got Talent stage. His trembling hands clutch a microphone, not out of fear, but reverence. His name is Jonel, a gospel singer from Cebu, who once sang in church ruins after a typhoon took everything from him. When Simon asks, "Why this song?" Jonel smiles faintly and says, "Because sometimes, people only see what's broken. But God taught me to show my true colors." The audience grows silent. The first notes begin, and what happens next, no one expects. Cebu wakes early. The sound of tricycles rattling down narrow streets mixes with the smell of fresh pandezel from the corner bakery. Amid the morning chaos, a soft voice rises clear, soulful, and filled with longing. It's Jonel, a thin young man with gentle eyes and calloused hands, standing barefoot on a cracked sidewalk. He closes his eyes as he sings, his voice carrying through the humid air like a prayer breaking through the noise of the city. Jonel has been singing since he could walk. His mother used to hum hymns while washing clothes by the river, and he'd mimic her, turning every melody into a dream. But when a devastating typhoon swept through their town, Jonel's life was torn apart. The flood took their home, and his parents. Left with nothing but an old Bible and a broken guitar, he found refuge inside a tiny chapel that had lost its roof, but not its faith. Every morning, Jonel swept the chapel floor, lit candles, and sang to fill the empty space. Locals began to gather, street vendors, children with dusty feet, and old men who came just to listen. They called him the boy who sings like he's talking to heaven. But Jonel never saw himself as special. To him, singing was survival, a way to stay connected to his parents, to hope, and to the belief that love could still exist in a world full of loss. Sometimes, tourists would pass by and drop coins into his small donation box. Other times, he'd go hungry. Yet he never stopped smiling. "God gives me music," he would say softly, "and that's enough." One hot afternoon, as Jonel sang Amazing Grace under the golden light of sunset, a foreign tourist paused and recorded him on a phone. His voice, untrained but pure, trembled with emotion. The man smiled, wiped away a tear, and posted the video online with the caption, "I just met a boy in Cebu who sings like an angel." Within days, the video spread like wildfire. People around the world were moved by his sincerity. A boy with no shoes, no stage, no spotlight, just a heart full of faith. Comments poured in. "He's what music should be. Someone needs to bring him to America's Got Talent." Jonel didn't even know what viral meant. He only found out when a local pastor came running into the chapel, waving a phone and saying, "You've touched the world." Soon after, he received a letter, an invitation to audition for America's Got Talent. He stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was real. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, Maybe this is my chance to sing for something bigger than me." And as the sun set behind the chapel that night, Jonel knelt before the altar and said quietly, "Lord, if this is your will, let my voice show them not my talent, but your light." The envelope in Joel's trembling hands felt unreal, as if it had fallen straight from heaven. America's Got Talent. Official invitation. He read the words over and over, afraid that if he blinked, they'd vanish. For a boy who had never owned a passport, never left Cebu, and rarely dreamed beyond survival, this was more than a chance, it was a miracle. He showed the letter to the local pastor, his eyes glistening. "Do you think I can really do this?" he whispered. The pastor smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Jonel, when God opens a door, you don't ask if you're worthy. You walk through it with faith." So, Jonel began preparing for the biggest journey of his life. Neighbors pitched in, one lent him a suitcase, another helped pay for his visa application. Children from the chapel made him tiny paper stars and wrote messages like "Sing for us, Kuja," and show them how kind hearts sound. He tucked each note inside his bag, promising he'd carry their hopes with him. When the day finally came, he boarded the plane barefoot, holding his worn guitar close. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft lifted into the sky, his first time seeing clouds from above. His reflection in the window looked uncertain, but there was peace in his eyes. Beneath his breath, he whispered, "Lord, I'm flying. And I'm not even afraid." As the plane crossed the Pacific, memories flooded in his mother's songs. The laughter of children in the chapel, the sound of rain hitting the broken roof. He realized this journey wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about carrying their stories, every smile, every tear, every prayer into a place where the world could finally hear them. When he landed in Los Angeles, the city lights felt like stars scattered across the earth. Everything was bigger, the roads, the buildings, the air itself. But inside, he still felt small. At the airport, people hurried past, faces glowing with confidence and comfort. Jonel clutched his guitar and whispered, "I'm just a boy from Cebu. What if I don't belong here?" But then he remembered a little girl's voice back home. "Kuya Jonel, when you sing, it feels like heaven listens." Those words became his courage. At the hotel, he sat by the window, strumming his guitar softly. He sang True Colors to himself, the song he'd chosen for his audition. Each lyric reminded him of home, of showing who you really are, even when life tries to hide it. He didn't have fancy clothes, a vocal coach, or a backup plan. What he had was something stronger, a voice born from faith, pain, and love. That night, before sleep claimed him, Jonel prayed once more, "Lord, tomorrow, let them see not me, but the light you placed inside me." And as dawn broke over Los Angeles, the boy from Cebu was ready, not just to sing, but to show the world his true colors. The stage of America's Got Talent felt like another universe, blinding lights, roaring applause, and cameras pointed in every direction. Jonel stood behind the curtain, gripping his guitar so tightly his knuckles turned white. His heart wasn't beating fast. It was pounding like a drum inside his chest. A crew member gently tapped his shoulder. "You're next." The words echoed through him like thunder as he stepped onto the stage. The audience quieted. Some looked curious. Others looked doubtful. He wasn't dressed like a star. His shirt was simple, his hair slightly messy, and his shoes were worn. But something about him, the humility in his posture, the warmth in his eyes, made people lean in. Simon Cowell narrowed his gaze, assessing him the way only Simon could. "What's your name, and why are you here today?" he asked. Jonel swallowed hard and spoke softly into the mic. "My name is Jonel. I'm from Cebu, Philippines. I'm here, not to be famous, but to show the world that even when life gets dark, there is still light inside every person. That's why I chose the song, True Colors." The audience fell into a deep, attentive silence. Then the music began. The first note he sang was quiet, almost fragile, like a whisper coming from someone who feared the world might not listen. But the honesty in his voice cut through the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You, with the sad eyes. Don't be discouraged." His voice trembled, not from nerves, but from memory. Memories of the typhoon, of the chapel with no roof, of singing to keep hope alive. Yet with each line, his voice grew stronger, raw, pure, radiant. People in the audience leaned forward without realizing it. Some placed a hand over their hearts. Even Simon's expression softened, something rarely seen so early in a performance. Halfway through the song, as Jonel sang the words, "I see your true colors shining through," a single tear slid down his cheek. His voice cracked just for a second, but instead of trying to hide it, he embraced it. That vulnerability became the most powerful moment of all. It felt as if the world stopped in that moment. Everyone could feel what this song meant to him. It wasn't just music. It was survival. It was gratitude. It was love. Jonel lifted his head and sang the final chorus with every ounce of his soul. It was no longer the voice of a street singer. It was the voice of a man showing the world that pain could become beauty, and tragedy could become faith. When the last note faded, the silence was overwhelming, not because the audience was unimpressed, but because they were stunned. Hearts had been hit instantly. Then, like a wave, people rose to their feet. A standing ovation. Jonel stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. He didn't see confetti. He didn't hear applause. All he felt was relief, not for himself, but for everyone back home who believed in him. He whispered under his breath, "Mama, Papa, I did it." The applause thundered through the theater. But Jonelle stood completely still, as if afraid that if he moved, the moment would disappear. The audience cheered, whistled, and wiped their eyes, but he didn't look at them. His gaze slowly lifted toward the judges' panel. Toward Simon Cowell. Simon wasn't speaking. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't doing the analytical eyebrow raise he was famous for. Instead, he sat with his hands clasped in front of his mouth, staring at Jonelle as if he had just witnessed something that words could not describe. The cheering faded as the audience settled back into their seats. A hush fell, not out of discomfort, but reverence. Everyone was waiting for Simon. Finally, he leaned forward, blinking back emotion. He began, but his voice caught. He paused, swallowed, and tried again. "I've been doing this for a long time. I've heard thousands of singers, but what you did tonight wasn't singing, it was truth." The audience sighed as if exhaling all at once. He continued, eyes glistening. "You didn't perform a song. You lived it. You exposed the deepest part of yourself and invited us in. And that is what makes a real artist." Jonelle's knees weakened, and he gripped the microphone stand to keep himself upright. He tried to speak, but Simon raised a hand gently, as if to say, "No, you don't need to say anything." "My whole career," Simon added, voice soft but steady, "I've been searching for moments where music does more than entertain, moments where it changes people. You changed this room." A quiet murmur swept through the audience, people nodding, wiping tears, holding their hands over their hearts. They knew they had just been part of something rare, and then, without warning, Simon reached for the button. The golden one. For a split second, Jonelle didn't even understand. His eyes widened, and then bam, Simon slammed his hand onto the golden buzzer. A burst of gold light exploded above the stage. Confetti rained down like stars falling from heaven. The crowd roared so loudly it shook the auditorium. Heidi jumped from her chair. Sophia covered her mouth in shock. Even Howie stood up, cheering. But the center of the storm, the only two people who seemed to exist in that moment, were Jonelle and Simon. Through the golden downpour, Simon stood and walked toward the stage. Jonelle dropped to his knees, not because of victory, but because the weight of gratitude was too heavy to stand under. He pressed his hands over his face and sobbed uncontrollably. When Simon reached him, he didn't shake his hand like a judge. He embraced him like a father. "You deserve the world to hear you," Simon whispered, so only Jonelle could hear. "Never hide your light again." The crowd erupted once more. Cameras flashed. Music soared. But Jonelle was somewhere else, kneeling on the ground, feeling the gold rain around him, whispering to the ones he lost, "Mama, Papa, this is for you." I kept singing. The moment the golden confetti stopped falling, Jonelle's life changed, yet his heart stayed exactly the same. News channels replayed his audition across the world. Social media overflowed with messages from strangers. "You restored my faith in humanity. Your voice made me call my mother and tell her I love her. Thank you for reminding us what music is supposed to feel like." For the first time, Jonelle wasn't just a boy singing on a street corner, he was a symbol of hope. But he never let the lights of fame overshadow the reason he sang. When journalists asked, "How does it feel to be famous?" he simply smiled and replied, "I'm not here to be famous. I'm here to be grateful." Even during the live shows in America, he woke up early each morning, sat by the window of his hotel room, and prayed not for victory, but for purpose. To him, faith mattered more than trophies, and kindness mattered more than applause. Then the finale came. And even though he didn't win the season, something bigger happened, something no trophy could match. A sponsor stepped forward and offered Jonelle a grant. Not for himself, but to create a music program back home in Cebu. The moment he heard those words, he broke down not from disappointment, but from overwhelming gratitude. A few months later, Jonelle returned home. The same streets that once echoed with a lonely voice, now echoed with fireworks, cheers, and open arms. Neighbors rushed to greet him. Children ran to hug him. The tiny chapel where he once sang alone was decorated with flowers and paper stars. Using the grant money, Jonel transformed that chapel into a small school of music for underprivileged kids. He painted the walls bright yellow and wrote a message over the door. Your true colors are your gift to the world. Every morning, children arrived with second-hand guitars, makeshift drums, and shy voices waiting to be heard. Jonel taught them not just how to sing but how to believe. He told them, "You don't need fame to shine. You don't need a stage to matter. The world needs your kindness more than your perfection." The little girl who once wrote him a paper star now stood at the front of the class, learning harmonies. The elderly fisherman who once sat in silence in the chapel now hummed along to the children's songs. Music wasn't just entertainment anymore, it was healing. Meanwhile, Simon Cowell kept in touch. He sent new instruments to the school and checked in through video calls. One day, he told Jonel, "The best artists aren't the ones who change music, they're the ones who change people, and you're one of them." Years passed, but Jonel never lost the humility of the boy who once sang barefoot on the streets of Cebu, and every time a child stepped onto the stage of that little chapel, nervous and unsure, he repeated the same words that guided his own journey. "Don't hide who you are. Let the world see your true colors." In the end, it wasn't the golden buzzer that changed Joan's life. It was the reminder that the greatest gift we can give the world is the kindness inside our hearts.